Montana Territory, spring of 1885. Some places seem to exist for people who have nowhere else to go. The town of Ash Creek was one of them. It wasn't marked on most maps. A weathered church stood beside a dusty main road, a blacksmith hammered horseshoes from sunrise until dusk, and a general store sold nearly everything a person might need if they didn't mind waiting a month for anything they didn't. Fewer than 300 souls called the place home, and every one of them knew every face that passed through town. On a cool April afternoon, the stagecoach rolled to a stop beneath a cloud of dust. A young woman stepped down carrying a single worn leather suitcase. Her name was Evelyn Carter. She was 26 years old. The black dress she wore wasn't chosen for fashion. It was chosen because it was the only decent dress she had left after selling nearly everything she owned back in Omaha. She looked around quietly. Mountains rose in the distance like silent guardians. Pine trees stretched across the hillsides, and the wind carried the clean scent of fresh grass instead of smoke in factories. For the first time in months, she could breathe without feeling the weight of crowded streets pressing against her chest. Still, she reminded herself of the truth. "Only 3 weeks," she whispered. 3 weeks helping her elderly cousin Margaret recover from an illness. Then she would return east. That had always been the plan. Margaret lived on a small homestead just outside town. The little house leaned slightly with age, surrounded by vegetable gardens that had clearly been neglected during the long winter. "I'm glad you came," Margaret said, embracing her carefully. "You look thinner." "I've been busy." "No," Margaret replied gently. "You've been grieving." Evelyn lowered her eyes. She had buried her husband only 10 months earlier after a railroad accident that had left her with nothing except debts and memories she couldn't escape. People in Omaha had treated her kindly. Too kindly. Every conversation became another reminder of what she had lost. Every familiar street carried another memory. She hadn't come west looking for a new life. She had come looking for silence. The following morning Margaret handed her a basket. "I need flour from town. I'll go and stop by Mr. Harris's stable. One of my old horses needs medicine." Evelyn nodded. The walk into Ash Creek took nearly half an hour. Birds filled the morning air with songs she'd almost forgotten existed. When she reached the stable, she found several ranch hands loading supplies onto wagons. One man stood apart from the others. He was repairing a broken saddle beneath the shade of an old cottonwood tree. His movements were slow, careful. Every stitch seemed deliberate. His hair had already begun turning silver around the temples, though his shoulders remained broad from years of honest labor. Someone nearby tipped his hat. "Morning, Nathan." The older man nodded politely. No unnecessary words. No effort to draw attention. Just quiet acknowledgement. Evelyn delivered Margaret's message to the stable owner before turning to leave. As she stepped outside, the strap on her worn suitcase snapped without warning. The case struck the dirt. Clothes spilled across the street. For a brief second she simply stared. Embarrassment rushed across her face. Several people glanced over. Before she could kneel, another pair of hands calmly began gathering her belongings. She looked up. It was the quiet rancher. He folded each piece of clothing carefully before placing it back inside the damaged case. "You don't have to. It's all right." His voice was deep but remarkably gentle. After examining the broken leather strap, he reached into his coat pocket and removed a length of strong rawhide. Within moments he had repaired it with practiced hands. "It should hold until you find a better one." She accepted the suitcase. "Thank you." He nodded once. "My pleasure." Then he picked up his saddle and walked away without waiting for further thanks. She watched him disappear down the street. "Who's that?" she asked the stable owner. "Nathan Brooks." "The rancher north of the river?" "The very one." "He doesn't talk much." "No," the stable owner chuckled. "But if Nathan Brooks says 10 words to you, every one of them will mean something." Days passed quietly. Evelyn settled into a peaceful routine. Morning chores. Helping Margaret in the garden. Reading beneath the old oak tree after supper. For the first time since losing her husband, she found herself sleeping through the night. One afternoon a violent storm rolled across the valley. The wind tore part of Margaret's barn roof loose. By sunrise the next morning someone was already repairing it. "Nathan." Margaret smiled from the porch. "I didn't ask him." "You didn't?" "He simply noticed." Nathan climbed carefully across the roof, replacing damaged boards before the next rain arrived. When he finished, Margaret carried out fresh coffee. Evelyn followed with homemade biscuits. Nathan accepted both with a grateful smile. "You bake these?" he asked. She nodded. "My mother taught me. They're better than mine." She laughed softly. "You bake. When necessary. And are they terrible?" He considered the question with complete seriousness. "They keep a man alive." She laughed again. A real laugh. Not the polite smile she'd been forcing for months. Nathan looked pleasantly surprised. As though hearing laughter on that porch somehow made the entire morning brighter. From then on he stopped by occasionally. Always with a reason. A loose fence. A stubborn gate. A wagon wheel needing repair. Yet somehow the work never seemed urgent enough to prevent him from staying for coffee afterward. They spoke about ordinary things. The weather. Books. Wildflowers blooming near the river. The stubborn mule that refused to cross the old bridge. Nathan listened more than he spoke. When Evelyn talked, he gave every word his complete attention. There was no hurry in him. No need to interrupt. No desire to impress anyone. It was a quality she'd almost forgotten people could possess. One evening they walked toward the ridge overlooking the valley. The setting sun painted the mountains with shades of amber and gold. Nathan removed his hat as the cool breeze swept across the hills. "My father used to say sunsets remind us that endings aren't always sad." She looked at him. What did he mean? He believed every sunset belongs to someone waking up somewhere else. She smiled thoughtfully. "That's beautiful. I didn't understand it until I got older." They stood in comfortable silence. Evelyn realized silence felt different beside Nathan. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't empty. It felt safe. After several minutes she asked quietly, "Were you always here?" "No." "Where did you come from?" "Missouri." "What brought you west?" "I needed room to breathe." She looked toward the endless mountains. "I think I understand that." Nathan glanced at her but asked no questions. He never asked about her past. She appreciated that more than she could explain. Weeks passed faster than either of them expected. Margaret regained her strength. The gardens flourished. Wildflowers covered the valley in brilliant colors. Evelyn found herself smiling without realizing it. One afternoon she noticed Nathan repairing a broken fence alone. She carried fresh lemonade to him. "You've helped us enough." He shrugged. "Neighbors help neighbors. You always have an answer." "No." He smiled faintly. "I usually just have another fence to fix." She laughed. Then her expression slowly changed. "I leave next Tuesday." Nathan continued tying the final knot in the fence wire. "I know. You knew." Margaret mentioned it. Neither spoke for several moments. The wind whispered through the grass. Birds circled high above the valley. "I almost forgot I was leaving," Evelyn admitted. Nathan looked toward the mountains. "That happens when a place begins to feel familiar." She swallowed quietly. "Maybe that's dangerous." "Why?" "Because people shouldn't become attached to places they can't keep." Nathan considered her words carefully before answering. "Sometimes it's the place that keeps the person." She looked at him. Those simple words settled somewhere deep inside her heart. The evening before her departure, Nathan stopped by once more. He carried a small wooden box. "I made this." She opened it carefully. Inside rested a beautifully carved bookmark shaped like a pine branch. "For your books," he explained. "So you'll remember Montana." Her eyes filled with emotion. "I'll never forget it." She hesitated before speaking again. "Nathan." He waited patiently. "I don't think someone like you should spend time worrying about someone like me." His brow furrowed slightly. "I'm a widow." "I know. My past isn't easy." "I know. I don't think I have much left to offer anyone." Nathan looked directly into her eyes. There was no pity in his expression. Only quiet certainty. "Evelyn." She met his gaze. "A wildfire leaves black earth behind." She nodded. "But every spring." He looked toward the green valley stretching beneath the evening sky. "That's where the strongest flowers grow." Neither of them spoke again. The sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains. Tomorrow morning the eastbound stagecoach would arrive. And although neither of them admitted it aloud, both already understood that saying goodbye would be far more difficult than either had imagined. The eastbound stagecoach disappeared beyond the hills, leaving behind nothing but drifting dust and silence. Nathan Brooks stood exactly where Evelyn had left him. His hat rested in his hands. He watched the empty road for several moments after the coach had vanished, as though part of him still expected it to return. Finally, he placed the hat back on his head and turned toward his horse. The ride home felt longer than usual, not because the road had changed, but because the ranch had. For nearly a month, Evelyn's laughter had found its way into every quiet corner of the place. Now the silence felt different. It no longer sounded peaceful. It sounded unfinished. Life returned to its familiar rhythm. The horses still needed feeding before sunrise. Fences still broke after storms. Calves still wandered farther than they should. Nathan completed every task the same careful way he always had. No one in Ash Creek noticed much difference, except old Samuel Harris, the stable owner. One afternoon Nathan stopped by to buy fresh horseshoes. Samuel leaned against the doorway. She made quite an impression. Nathan looked up. Who? The only woman in this town who managed to make you smile twice in 1 week. Nathan simply paid for the horseshoes. Samuel chuckled. You know, some men spend their whole lives pretending they don't miss someone. Nathan secured the supplies to his saddle. I'm not pretending. No. Samuel smiled. I suppose that's your way. Meanwhile, back in Omaha, life resumed exactly where Evelyn had left it. The boarding house overlooked crowded streets filled with wagons, factories, and endless noise. She returned to bookkeeping at a shipping office. Every morning looked exactly like the one before. Columns of numbers, stacks of invoices, ink-stained fingers, polite conversations. Everything was orderly. Everything was secure. Everything felt strangely empty. During lunch breaks, she often found herself staring out the office window. Instead of mountains, there were brick buildings. Instead of birds, factory whistles echoed through the streets. One evening she opened her suitcase. Inside rested the small wooden bookmark Nathan had carved. She traced its smooth edges with her fingertips. Without realizing it, she smiled. Nearly 3 weeks after returning east, she finally picked up her pen. The letter began simply. Dear Nathan, I hope the spring rains haven't washed away your fences. Margaret tells me the garden is growing better than ever. The city is exactly as I remembered. Busy, loud, practical. I suppose I should be grateful everything has returned to normal. But lately I find myself missing places where evenings are quiet enough to hear the wind. Thank you again for the bookmark. It has found its place inside my favorite novel. I hope you're well. Evelyn. She read the letter twice, then mailed it before she could change her mind. 10 days later, a reply arrived. Nathan's handwriting was neat, steady. Every word looked as though it had been placed with care. Dear Evelyn, the fences survived. One stubborn horse escaped yesterday. He returned before supper. I suspect he realized freedom requires more work than expected. The valley is green again. Margaret's tomatoes appear determined to outgrow everyone else's. The ranch is quieter than it was in April. I finished the novel you recommended. You were right. The ending wasn't about the journey. It was about discovering where the journey had always been leading. Thank you for lending it to me. Take care of yourself. Nathan. Evelyn read the final paragraph 4 times. Somehow, he always seemed able to say more with fewer words. Summer arrived. The letters continued. Every 2 or 3 weeks another envelope crossed nearly 1,000 miles. At first they wrote about weather, books, gardens, ranch work. Then little by little, the letters became more personal. Nathan wrote about his parents. How his father had built the ranch with nothing except determination and borrowed tools. Evelyn wrote about losing her husband. Not dramatically, simply honestly. She admitted that grief had convinced her happiness belonged to other people. Nathan never replied with sympathy. He replied with understanding. Sometimes those were very different things. One September evening Evelyn remained at the office long after everyone else had gone home. Rain tapped gently against the window. The room was quiet. She unfolded Nathan's latest letter. One sentence captured her attention. Some people spend years searching for peace, only to discover they already met it once and walked away because they were afraid they didn't deserve it. She stared at the words. They felt uncomfortably true. For the first time since leaving Montana, she cried. Not because she was sad. Because she finally understood what her heart had been trying to tell her. She didn't miss Montana. She missed the life she had become while living there. That same night she wrote back, "Dear Nathan, I have rewritten this letter 4 times. Each version sounded polite. None sounded honest. So I will simply tell you the truth. The city has everything I once believed I wanted. Or security, predictability. Yet every evening I find myself remembering the sound of horses in your pasture, coffee on Margaret's porch, and sunsets that seem to last forever. I thought I came west only to escape my grief. Instead, I found a version of myself I had forgotten existed. Perhaps that is why leaving hurt so much. I hope you understand what I mean." Evelyn. She sealed the envelope before fear could convince her otherwise. Nathan received the letter 6 days later. He carried it to the porch before opening it. The autumn wind drifted across the valley. Golden leaves rolled through the grass. He read every word slowly. Then he folded the letter. He remained seated long after sunset. Finally he walked inside, lit an oil lamp and began writing. His reply was the longest letter he had ever sent. "Dear Evelyn, I've read your letter 3 times. Each reading made one thing clearer. I have lived alone for many years. Not unhappily. This ranch has given me purpose. The land has always been enough. Until this spring." Then someone arrived carrying a broken suitcase and believing she had nothing left worth offering. She was mistaken. "You brought laughter back to a porch that had been quiet for years. You reminded me conversations don't need many words to matter. You made ordinary mornings feel different. I don't know what future you imagine for yourself. I only know the future I imagine now includes one more chair on this porch. I'm not asking you to forget your past. I'm asking whether you might consider building tomorrow beside mine. Whatever your answer. Thank you for giving an old rancher one beautiful spring he will never forget. Nathan." The letter reached Omaha in early October. Evelyn carried it to the nearby park before opening it. Golden leaves drifted through the air. Children laughed nearby. Yet the world seemed to disappear as she read. When she reached the final paragraph, she closed her eyes. For months she had believed returning west would mean abandoning everything. Now she understood something far more important. She wouldn't be running away. She would be running toward the life she'd been searching for all along. 3 weeks later, Nathan waited beside the Ash Creek station. He hadn't told anyone why. The afternoon train finally appeared around the bend. Passengers stepped down one after another. Traveling salesmen, families, soldiers, an elderly couple. Then, a familiar black dress appeared beneath a cream-colored traveling coat. Evelyn stepped onto the platform carrying the same suitcase. Only this time, the leather strap Nathan had repaired months earlier was still holding. She spotted him almost immediately. For a moment neither moved. The station buzzed with conversation around them. But between them, there was only quiet recognition. Nathan removed his hat. His slow smile returned. The same smile she had carried in her memory for half a year. She walked toward him. "So," Nathan said softly, "you came back." She smiled through tears. "I finally understood something." "What was that?" She looked toward the distant mountains glowing beneath the autumn sun. "I wasn't searching for another place." She met his eyes. "I was searching for home." Nathan nodded once. "As it turns out," he said gently, "home has been waiting." He reached for her suitcase. Not because she couldn't carry it. Because some journeys were never meant to be finished alone. Together they climbed into the wagon. The horses started forward. Behind them, Ash Creek slowly disappeared into the evening light. Ahead of them, the winding road climbed toward the quiet ranch where 2 lonely hearts had finally discovered that healing does not erase the past. It simply teaches us that love can still grow where sorrow once lived. And as the golden sun settled behind the Montana mountains, Evelyn realized something she never thought possible. For the first time in years, she wasn't traveling away from her life. She was finally riding toward it.